Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Airtime with Jordan. I'm your host, Jordan Faso. You probably could have guessed that based on the show title, but anyway, we are here today talking about some of the clubs at the bottom of the ladder, the cellar dwellers, if you will, a bit of how they got there, where to now for them from a list management perspective. I will start by saying that I won't do North Melbourne. I will be doing them probably at the end of the year and do a bit of a post-mortem on their season come the end of it. We know that they have a pretty bright future with all the picks they've had over the last few years with Sheasel, Wardlaw, Colby McKercher, and Luke Davies-Uniacke. Obviously, he's a bit older than those guys, but they've got a very promising list, and especially in the midfield. So I think that they're at a bit of a different stage to the other two teams that I'm going to primarily be discussing. Those two being West Coast and the Tigers, because those two teams specifically are probably entering this rebuild stage of their list. So, it's just a natural sort of life cycle in footy, unless you're Sydney or Geelong. So, those two teams are, unfortunately, they've had their success, specifically the Tigers. I've got a lot of family and friends, so I've had to deal with that sort of shit over the last 5 or 6 years of them being good, but, they probably didn't enjoy me when the Hawks were up and about. So, what goes around comes around, and, it's thankfully time to talk about the Tigers and West Coast specifically in a way that, they're down the bottom of the ladder now, and let's see where they can go from here. So, I will say as well that the stats from this episode are accurate as of the end of round 17, and as this is a bit of a list management episode, like, these stats will, still be relevant in 4 or 5 weeks' time, I guess. It's just sort of proving a point of where they're at and where they can go from here. So, just wanted to start by shouting out Reddit user Credit to Du Bois. He posted on the AFL Reddit this graphic where basically showed the AFL player ratings for each team and the associated age group that those ratings are coming from per team. So, basically which age groups are carrying your team at the moment. So they're split up into sort of 4 age groups. There's 18 to 20, 21 to 24-year-olds, 25 to 29, and the older boys that are over 30. Specifically for West Coast and Richmond, I thought they were, interesting. But the 18 to 20-year-olds, West Coast had, the majority of these points had 22.4% from this group versus Richmond's 12.7%. The 21 to 24-year-olds, West Coast had 13%, and Richmond had 26.5%. The 25 to 29-year-olds is the sort of overlap between these two lists, and where West Coast are 41.8% and Richmond are 47.4%, and then the 30 plus group, West Coast are 22.8 and Richmond are 13.4. So the interesting thing I saw with these two teams is that the proportion that they have in that window from 25 to 29, and whether those guys in that window can hang on a little bit while they withstand the rebuild, and if not, then what sort of action can those teams take based on the where they're getting the best play from in their age profile at the moment. So I think West Coast obviously have a bit more top end talent than Richmond in that first age bracket, the 18 to 20-year-olds, probably very much carried by Harley Reid. So maybe they might be able to jump up a bit quicker than Richmond based on the him alone factor. But Richmond I guess at the moment are sort of lacking that young premium talent. But that comes with being so good for so long, and I think they'll be happy with 3 premierships, so they'll let West Coast have Harley Reid for the meantime anyway. Let's jump into West Coast and see how they sort of got here. I think that, a few years ago, they sort of made a bet on their health getting a bit better and the senior players being able to carry the load again once they were back from injury. I think that the old guys from the premiership that they bet on after the 2020 sort of season, I know their premiership was in 2018, but I'm just saying the 2020 season sort of when they started, which was actually the last time they made the finals. So their list, the older guys from that premiership team. We've got McGovern, who's 32, still playing great footy, but is not going to be there forever. Elliot Yeo, started the season on absolute fire. Got the contract, has fallen back to earth a little bit now. Maybe he's the midfield Jakey Stringer. We don't know. Might just be a coincidence there, but playing well in that contract year sort of situation. Liam Duggan is another one. He's outperforming his career averages across the board at the moment. Then you got Tom Barrass, who's 28. performing at the same level he sort of was last year. Has been pretty consistent. Liam Ryan, who's still there from the premiership years, he's on his career average based on this year. He's averaging half a goal less a game, slightly less tackles, and just overall lower stats than you probably expect. Dom Sheed is another one. He just cannot stay healthy, unfortunately for him. Jamie Cripps as well, Jack Darling and Tommy Cole. So some of the guys that are left over from their premiership year, you're not feeling great, I guess, about them right at the moment. I guess that, it's easy to say now after they've sacked Simo during the week, but, I think for them, they were sort of banking on these guys being able to still be the core of the premiership team, and I guess that now that, they've clearly moved into a different direction with Adam Simpson, whether that can still be the case and which of those guys I sort of just mentioned will be able to keep driving the team forward as they sort of go into this next chapter. So I guess the bet that they made didn't work out. The injuries just kind of kept happening over that period of time. Not as much happening this year, I guess, on the injury front, which is sort of why it's come to a head. You've got, a few that have been injured, like Dom Sheed and Elijah Hewitt have been out all the season pretty much, and Oscar Allen has only played 4 games to this point, or 5 games to this point. So, that's sort of held them back from seeing what they have as a team, I guess, at the moment, but it doesn't fill you with the most sort of the highest level of confidence going forward. I think that as well as you couple that with the recruits that they've brought in over the last sort of 2 years, 3 years. You got Jaden Hunt, Tyler Brockman, Matt Flynn, and Alex Witherden. They're all okay players. Nothing against those guys at all, but they're not going to shift the competitive balance of this team, especially if you can't keep some of the better older guys on the paddock. So I think that's a nice little juxtaposition to see where sort of the two WA teams stand at the moment. Those are the guys that West Coast have brought in over the last few years to help sort of supplement the guys that they've already had on the list. But and you compare that to Freo, and you sort of think of West Coast as the destination club in the West. But if you look at Freo's recruits, especially Jordan Clark in 2022 and Luke Jackson as well from 2023. It's a bit of a contrast between the two teams at the moment. So the West Coast betting on their health of the older guys getting a bit better, which hasn't really happened, and their return to form hasn't happened either. And then sort of missing on the guys that Freo might have gotten in compared to what West Coast, I'm sure, were in the chase for those guys, just didn't get over the line and they went to Freo. So I guess that regardless of the pedigree of the club in terms of West Coast being the traditionally superior club than Freo, I guess that at the end of the day, players want to come back to WA for a reason, and that's to get home, but they also want to play in a competitive team, and West Coast have not really been that over the last few years. And I think that you can probably focus as well a bit on another sort of part of the list management they've failed on. Obviously they've missed on someone getting those guys back that were coming to WA, and Luke Jackson and Jordan Clark, and getting guys that don't necessarily help them either. But it's not all the health and the fall off from some of those better players that's hurt them. While they have been down, they've had draft picks. So the draft picks they've made in the last few years, obviously, the big one is Harley Reid. So I think that they picked him, so that you can't they made the right pick, but I don't necessarily think you can give them credit for picking probably the best prospect in the last sort of however many years of the AFL. He's been hyped to no end. So I think that it's a pretty obvious decision. The one thing that last year's draft, they didn't make necessarily many mistakes. It's hard to say so far, but they were hurt by the length of the first round in the draft last year with all the matching on bids for either father, son, or academies. So it sucks for them in terms of they didn't get they had the first pick of the second round, and that didn't happen until pick 30. So instead of usually being in that 20 to 23, 24 range, they had to wait all the way until pick 30 to get their second pick, which obviously isn't ideal for them. When you're down on the bottom, you want to have a few picks that you can sort of start to jolt your rebuild, and I think that's hurt them. Then the Harley Reid thing obviously makes up a little bit for not getting a pick until 30, but the one trade that really hurt them, I think, looking back, was in 2022 they gave up I think it was a 4-team deal. They gave up Willie Rioli, who didn't give him up. He wanted to leave, so it was after his suspension from out of the game being due to performance enhancing drugs, I think it was. And they gave up Willie Rioli and pick 2 they had that year for pick 8, pick 12, and a 2023 second rounder and a 2023 third rounder. So that was essentially giving up Willie Rioli and pick 2 for who they used on pick 8 was Ruben Gibney. Pick 12 was Elijah Hewitt. 2023 second rounder ended up being this guy, Clay Hall. And the 2023 third rounder was Harvey Johnston. So jury's still out a little bit on those other guys, the later guys. But I think, they made the bet on taking more bites at the apple and looking for WA talent as well. But when I tell you who was pick 2, if you don't already know, it was Harry Sheasel. So I think looking back on that trade, would you rather have taken Harry Sheasel instead of Gibney and Elijah Hewitt, essentially, and the other 2 guys they took in this last draft? And I think that it's a pretty clear sort of take. I think I would rather just have Sheasel and Harley Reid alone in hindsight. Because could you imagine what a duo those guys would be for the years to come? I don't think you should operate under the assumption of just drafting WA talent because you think that the Victorian boys will leave. Like if it's such a factor, then why even bother taking the WA talent, because they're just as likely to come home as the Victorian boys, and you can get Ruben Gibney in 3 or 4 years' time if he wants to come home. If it's such a factor of you not taking Harry Sheasel at 2 and trading back to take him, I think just take the best player available and build a good team, and they'll want to stay. I understand getting the more bites of the apple, but when you've got a top 2 pick, the second pick, and didn't take Sheasel, you had the opportunity to. It ended up being pick 3 because of the Will Ashcroft father-son bid. But yeah, I think that that's sort of a mistake they made there in the rebuild. I think that in the mid-season draft, teams have been able to find gems in that. I don't necessarily think that West Coast have been able to do that. Not necessarily any fault of their own. They took 2022 Jai Cully, 2023 Ryan Marriage, and 2024 Jack Hutchison. So I think you get a bit of a pass with the Jai Cully one. He's had a few knee injuries since then, but in that draft they did miss out on Massimo D'Ambrosio, Sam Durden, and Jai Menzies are 3 guys that were taken after them. Taken after Jai Cully in that mid-season draft. We've seen the success that those 3 guys have had, and then to a greater degree, it's a bit able. Teams are able to find good talent in those drafts at the moment. You've seen the Hawks with Newcomb and the Bombers with Sam Durham. So yeah, I think that it's just another tool to be able to rebuild. And unfortunately for West Coast, they have not been able to hit on any of those guys yet. Still time for them to pan out, but that definitely hasn't helped them either. So that their drafting, apart from making the easy decision to take Harley Reid, hasn't been great either. But yeah, the breakdown in the last couple of years is not just missing on the picks. It's obviously it's all of sort of what I just spoke about. So and then more. So it's missing. It's sort of making a judgment on the health of their senior players. Those guys not really getting back, taking the picks that you did take, not necessarily making the right ones or right decisions at that point in time, and then the recruits that they got in the door just weren't real difference makers compared to some of the recruits that did want to come to WA. So missing out on those guys, missing some draft picks, and the lack of return to form for their older players sort of ends up hurting them a bit. I think that the other thing is once you've gotten some of the draft picks in the door, the kids didn't have any structure or the ability to learn on the fly, just out on the ground, because they were sort of thrown to the wolves a little bit without the lack of all the senior players being injured, and so maybe there's an alternate universe, where the failure of the high performance team isn't a factor, and these guys might have improved, and the older guys, might have held on to their form a bit better, but yeah, it just wasn't the case, unfortunately. So I think some of those picks aren't looking great. It's still Elijah Hewitt's the one, I guess, that we're not sure on at the moment. He has had a bit pretty injury prone to start his career, but missed most of this year, or all of this year actually, with a foot injury. So jury's still out on him. Ruben Gibney is good inside mid, just would rather have Harry Sheasel than those two, I guess, at this point in time. But yeah, I'm not necessarily sure who's at fault. But all the areas of team building and list management, I guess, sort of a little bit under question at the moment. Like the management and scouting of players in the draft and around the league hasn't been amazing with the guys they brought in. The development coaching, like none of the guys that they have brought in have been, whether it be free agents, trades, etc., haven't necessarily driven heaps of improvement. And then obviously the training and fitness teams aren't pulling aren't doing them any wonders, given the fact that they've had so many injuries over the last couple of years. So for the biggest club in arguably the biggest club in Australia, and now the firing of Adam Simpson, it's sort of been a failure these last 4 years. I think it's safe to say. I think that the old players that were in those, like that sort of premiership era they had, premiership contention sort of era, like those guys are barely back to their best, and definitely not enough to attract good talent like we've seen with Luke Jackson and Jordan Clark moving to Freo. I think that the guys they brought in may not be playing heaps at other clubs, like your Alex Witherden's and Tyler Brockmans and stuff, especially compared to some of the guys that I spoke about, and Jordan Clark and Luke Jackson that chose Freo. You have this advantage of being a go home factor in a big footy state, and they weren't able to attract the talent when you're only one of the two teams in the hunt. And just in comparison, North Melbourne have been sort of bagged out for that over the journey, and St Kilda to a degree for not being able to get like the big names to come to them. But at least North Melbourne and St Kilda have 9 other teams to compete with in that aspect, whereas in WA there's only the 2 teams and still a big footy state. So I think they're probably losing a bit of their shine there. So I think that they do have still a bit of upside, obviously, and I think that the process is still pretty far from over. I think you always got Harley Reid, who's going to need some help. I think they've got Ruben Gibney and Elijah Hewitt that have come through the top picks at the moment, which could be his running mates a little bit. I think that Hewitt's still a bit of a question mark given how little footy he's played. I think the one thing is hopefully Elliot Yeo can stay healthy and actually play until 2027, which is when his contract was extended until. Other points of upside, you got Oscar Allen, who's the captain. He's only 25. Looked like he was ready to, really put his stamp on the competition a few years ago before he's had this string of injuries. And then obviously the emergence of Jake Waterman as well has been great this year for them. So they've got some good things happening for them still, despite sort of the last few years of being a bit of a failure in terms of list management, and just other areas. But I think that they've got some potential to work with, and as I sort of described in the age groupings data, like can the question is, can the group hold on while they go for a bit of a rebuild, like go through this period? They've still got Liam Ryan, Duggan, Tommy Cole, Tim Barras, Tim Kelly as well, all guys who are from 27 to 29. So if those guys can't hold on, then do you maybe start looking at moving some of them? Liam Ryan was in rumours last off season, or if you don't think that they can hold on, should I say, like if you like want to cut ties a bit and get ahead of sell the value while it's still there a little bit, I think that probably might be a better option. Liam Ryan was in rumours last off season, and seems like Tom Barras is always in the rumour mill, much to his dismay. I think he had a few comments in the media a few weeks ago, but yeah, you've got Liam Duggan, obviously a captain as well, and Tommy Cole. They're both Victorian boys who, I think could still help a team back here. So maybe there's an opening to regain some value if they did decide to go full rebuild. Because I think So I think that like there's no real way that teams can at the moment thread the needle between two timelines. So I think you sort of have to pick one way or the other. You still need some experienced players, and Liam Duggan being the skipper is probably going to stick around. But I don't think that teams can successfully operate on like two timelines where they're sort of rebuilding and like trying to rebuild, but on the fly where they've got some senior players who are still trying to compete, especially when they're in that like I said, the bulk of their talent is coming from that like 25 to 29 age range, and you've got a bit of a gap there between the talent that's then coming through with Harley and Ruben Gibney and stuff. So I think that it's not the best way to operate on two timelines, and I think that we'll get a clear picture of where they're going after they hire a next coach, and probably see some delistings and things like that at the end of the year, which will sort of indicate the direction they're going into. So, just something to think about from their perspective. There's just in summing that all up, I think that there's a few factors that have contributed to where they are now, like I said, but I think that the best way out of that is picking a direction and sticking with it. I think that direction obviously is starting to trade some of these guys and keeping a few of them around, like the leaders of the club. But I think that you may as well try and get some value for the guys while they're still in that sort of age range where they can help other teams. Which leads me to the Tigers. I'll start on them by saying it's been an unfortunate year for them with injury as well. Sort of having the year West Coast had last year, I suppose, with all their senior players getting injured, and probably had a bit higher expectations than currently sitting last on the ladder. So, I think it opens up a nice parallel between the two of them to talk about how they manage the list, like sort of going into the off season. And I spoke about, not wanting to cut too deep in terms of needing some experienced players still on your list, but I think that the Tigers probably can afford to sell high on a few of the guys, given the fact that they lack that premium talent that in that really young age group, like from that 18 to 20, which West Coast sort of have a bit more of, albeit carried by Harley Reid. So the two guys that I guess I want to touch on are Dan Rioli and Shea Bolton, and like some potential discussion about them, what they should do with those two specifically. I think that Rioli's 27, Shea Bolton's 25, and they're probably the two that you look at in the Richmond team and you think you get some value for, plus there's been some rumours about them as well. So I think that Rioli, I'll start with him, is having quietly one of his better seasons, probably if not his best season. But I guess it's just the question of whether Richmond should get rid of him or not, in addition to Liam Baker, who's also on the way out. So you still need some talent, especially across half back. So I think those two, given the fact that Baker's all but gone, I think that you'd have to have a bit longer think about whether what you want to do with Rioli, and also how much he's even worth. So it doesn't hurt to keep guys that have premiership experience, especially as you're going through a rebuild. But I think that Rioli's probably a bit of a difficult one to pick where his value is at the moment, and whether he's worth keeping just based on the fact that Liam Baker's heading west most likely. But I think Shea Bolton is the guy that I'm probably a bit more inclined to say they should move now. I know Adam Uze came out the other day and said that he's contracted and he's one of our better players, and he's only 25, but I think that I will say he's had a bit of a down year. Probably not. Well, it probably just is proportional to Richmond's down year in general. He's had his moments, but not having a key forward as well hasn't helped him at all. He's 25, as I said, and they're not going to be good for the next few years, you wouldn't think. So, but he is in that age group where, he could be there for the next finals tilt, I guess, based on Adam Uze's sort of required player statement at the club. But, his as I said, his value is probably down a little bit. But I think that teams would still pay an absolute premium to get him through the door. And based on that, I think that Richmond also wouldn't let him go unless that was the case. So, you're not giving him up for something that's not an absolute haul. But I think that the fact that you could go out and get a haul if they think that Shea Bolton is the missing piece for that team, then, I think it's a fun thought exercise to think about. And one of my mates, who's a Richmond fan, Shout out to Jack. He said a few weeks ago when we were at the Dusty 300 game that like he thought as a Richmond fan that they should sell high on him, and it sort of just got me thinking about that. And although he may not look like he's the All-Australian guy from 2022, it's for a few years where the Tigers are probably dropping off. So most likely it's a good time to sort of sell high while the shine's still on him, so to speak. So I think that it depends what the value would be. It would be like you'd probably wanting to get 2 firsts back if you're Richmond, or like a young interesting player and a first as well. Could be pretty interesting. So I'm not saying I would necessarily do it. It is Shea Bolton, and we've seen what he can do. But I think you definitely do it if you can get a premium return. If I was in charge, I'm not obviously, but. If that premium return was there, I think you'd have to have a good think about it. But yeah, the reason that these trades are sort of brought up is because the Tigers are in this weird holding pattern, and like, do they want to rebuild yet or not? I think that much in the same way as West Coast were a few years ago, do you believe in Lynch and Prestia getting healthier, and the same with like Taranto and Hopper? Like, do you believe those guys can sort of carry a team now that Dusty and Cochin and Rewald have passed on and sorry, that sounds pretty grim. Moved on, not passed on. But yeah, I think that those guys, if you're Richmond, you're thinking like, who can we get value for here? Because I don't necessarily believe in that core sort of group of players getting back to the absolute tippy top of things. It's probably much to a parallel that Hawthorn had a few years ago when they brought in Tom Mitchell and Jagan O'Meara after they're on the back end of the dynasty. I think that that you sort of hope that you can continue to compete, but the guys that you had are just so much better than the guys you can bring in, especially when you grow the team from scratch. So I think that they're on that similar trajectory where, and from experience, I think Hawthorn should have cut their list out sooner. So I get trying to hold on for a few years, but I don't think that this core can necessarily take Richmond. It's not in their best interest to build another premiership team to keep all these guys. So I think that the ones that you do trade are probably Rioli and Bolton and those sort of guys, because if you're going to keep Lynch, Prestia, Taranto and Hopper, that's okay, but you just want to move some of them on. So like, I'm just going to do a bit of an exercise and look at the haul you could potentially get for Liam Baker, Shea Bolton and Rioli. Like, if they let Baker go to the West for a big contract, like, they're going to be in line for a top 5 pick, based on the compensation. At the moment, that would probably be the pick 2, and then you couple that with 1 or 2 extra first round picks for Shea Bolton, and then maybe a second rounder for Rioli. So I'm not really sure where teams value him, but I think that if you're coming away with your own pick that's number 1, another pick in the top 5, which would be from Liam Baker's, and another 1 or 2 for Bolton and Rioli, like, you're sitting in a position where you have those premium picks over the next few years. You decide to shift your rebuild into full tilt rebuild, and then you've already got some young guys on the roster that have impressed. You got Ben Miller, Tom Brown, Josh Gibcus, if he can ever stay healthy, Hugo Ralphsmith, Maurice Rioli, and Noah Bolter still only 25 by the end of the season. So I think you're not ready to win over the next couple of years anyway, and as those older guys age out, I think that then the rebuild would start to happen. So I think that being proactive about where they're at right now sort of makes sense to definitely have a think about trading. Rioli and Bolton probably are the 2 that have the most value and are young enough to help other teams and still give not kill you in terms of letting go of them in the meantime. Whereas if you keep Lynch and Prestia, who are on their sort of last legs anyway a bit, and keep Taranto and Hopper because they're on big deals, and I'm not sure teams would necessarily be trading for those contracts right now. It sort of leaves those 2 that I mainly spoke about as the currency to get some young premium talent in. So I think, if you get those picks in, then it's potentially not the best year to have the number 1 pick, as apparently the draft is quite flat in terms of talent at the top and it's midfielder based. But if they have heaps of bites of the apple, in the same way that West Coast, I spoke about West Coast doing, but the difference is that West Coast traded a premium pick for them more bites of the apple, whereas Richmond would just have more bites of the apple with trading some of their more experienced players. So I think that having that solid return in draft picks in a flat draft is not necessarily a bad thing. I think getting more chances to get that young talent that they currently lack compared to West Coast as well is pretty important for them. But I think that, obviously the thing on everyone's mind is what's going to happen with Dusty Martin. So that leads me into what to do with Dusty. I'll preface this by saying, given his age and free agency status, he won't be returning a first-round pick if he leaves for the Gold Coast in free agency. So I'm not looking at it through the lens of helping Richmond rebuild anymore. I just want to clear that up. It's more just what to do with him at this point in his career, because he's not going to necessarily get them some sort of premium draft picks if he does leave. I think that let's take a look quickly at just his stats from last year to this year. His disposals are down by about 6 disposals a game. His goals are down by about a quarter of what it was last year. Down by a quarter, so 3/4 of what it was last year. His tackles are down from 1.9 to 1.4. His inside 50s are down from last year. His goal assists are about the same. His contested possessions are almost dropped 5.5 contested possessions a game, which obviously was at one point in time his bread and butter. Contested marks are falling off a cliff. He used to take 1 a game. He's averaging 0.2 now. His marks inside 50s are basically halved as well. His clearances are down from 3 to 1. His time on ground is down 5% as well. Meters gained are down about 120 metres off last year, and his score involvements are down by 2.2 as well. So I think that, Richmond in general, their sort of fall from grace this year has sort of probably coincided with Dusty's fall a little bit as well. I think Dusty's spending a bit more time in the forward half, so some of those stats are naturally going to drop off a little bit. And the number of coupling that with the drop of the team inside 50s, they dropped about 6 inside 50s less this year. So there's a few less opportunities, plus a shift in his positioning can lead to this sort of drop, I guess, a little bit. But I think that overall, there's still obviously a clear drop in his, the quality that we've come to expect from Dusty Martin. So I've been working on something kind of cool the last few nights, and just trying to figure out a way to see who has a similar statistical profile to Dusty at this point in the year. So based on all those stats from this year to date, I averaged all the games out, and then I wanted to find a way to find a player, and then, you take a player, find all the other players who match them across a certain amount of categories, and with a 10% delineation of those categories to allow for a bit of variance of those specific stats. So basically just trying to find players that have a similar statistical profile to Dusty Martin at the moment. I will say that I will improve this over time. Currently, I'm not taking into account position, height, weight, age, and everything. So it's purely just based on their stats to date right now, without any team context as well. So it's not the be-all and end-all, but based on the current statistical profile of Dusty, the sort of 4 players that most closely match him at the moment, based on his output this season, Zach Bailey, Will Hoskin-Elliott, Elijah Hollins from the Blues, and Liam Ryan out west for the Eagles. So, off just on a name sort of basis, they're not necessarily bad comparisons. And you'd think, oh, that's all right, he's still playing at that sort of level. But I think I'll ignore the Will Hoskin-Elliott one because he's playing all over the ground at the moment. But the other 3 are sort of pretty applicable, I think, playing that sort of half-forward role, higher half-forward role. But those names, Zach Bailey, Elijah Hollins, and Liam Ryan, Zach Bailey is probably having the worst year of his career since his first year, you'd argue, and Liam Ryan is pretty out of form as well. So the fact that Dusty's sort of having a similar year to those guys, although on a name basis probably doesn't do it justice on where he's at right now. I think that Dusty next year will be a year older. Do you really want to trust that he's going to perform at the same level as he is this year? I don't necessarily think so. I I'm sort of a bit worried about where he could fall to, and for that reason, despite all the chatter about his plans next year, for his sake, I'd probably prefer him to either just, stay at Richmond, have that farewell tour in the original colours that he's worn his whole career, just for one more year if he wants to do so, and then there's no real pressure at the Tigers to perform or anything like that. It'll be just a good year for fans and him as well to help that next brigade sort of thing. So I think that if I was making a decision, obviously I'm not have nothing to do with the Tigers, anything like that, but I'd prefer him to just either stay another year with the Tigers where there's no pressure, or retire at the end of the year as a Tiger. So with that being said, like there is always the possibility of him moving to the Gold Coast, and just sort of a natural link there, I guess, is that I mentioned those players that he's sort of got the statistical profile of at the moment. Elijah Hollands is one of them. So just quickly from the Gold Coast perspective, like, I don't really know why they would, what the need would be from a purely on-field basis of bringing Dusty in when, they just got rid of Elijah Hollands for nothing. So I think that would be, from just a team construction sort of point of view, I don't see the point for Gold Coast other than, like, based on Dusty's current output and plus a year on next year where he's like a little bit older, has to go through another preseason, etc. So, maybe he gets a bit healthier, and Gold Coast think they can help get him to that healthier sort of state. But I can't really see him surpassing his stats from this year to date up there. So I think that sort of puts him in a territory where, where's that next drop off going to come, and like which other players in the comp he's not going to be playing at. Career worst Zach Bailey level or career worst Liam Ryan level next year, which, you don't really want to see from a champion either, but like Dusty's been. But I think that sort of raises the question for Gold Coast, like what do you, like, I see the value for Richmond of holding on to him for another year as an absolute all-time great. But yeah, from Gold Coast's point of view, like if he does go there, I guess it's not the end of the world. Like, like I can understand and appreciate the, having another figurehead up there. Like, they haven't really had that since Gary Ablett left, and so maybe it is more just about growing the game up there and getting some confidence into the team in general. It won't be costing them anything to do the deal in terms of sending anything back to Richmond, so like they're not going to lose anything on field or like through draft picks. But I guess the potential downside would be for them, tying up your salary cap in a tying up your salary cap space in, like, with Dustin Martin, who's on his last legs of his career, albeit he's a champion, obviously, but he potentially doesn't have much left. So I think that, like, that could just, I don't know whether the risk is worth the reward for Gold Coast, because I don't necessarily think he's going to be playing at a crazy level based on his stats this year if he moved north. I think that sort of a cool parallel, well, not cool, but like a parallel for any NBA fans out there would be the last few years of, Kobe Bryant's career, where he was spent it on like a middling to poor team, and he just sort of reduced the flexibility to do anything with the salary cap, because he took up, if Dusty's going to go up there and take up $700,000 or $800,000, whatever it might be, for a couple of years, like, I don't know whether that money could be better used elsewhere to retain players that, you've got Rowell and Noah Anderson up there who are probably wanting big deals soon. And I think that, yeah, I would probably prefer not to bring him in and potentially not have the on-field impact that you think he will based on his stats this year alone. I think that that's a safe-ish conclusion. But yeah, I think that overall might not be the best call unless it's just purely as a figurehead sort of position for Dusty up there. But yeah, I think that I will touch on Gold Coast a bit more in more detail in a few weeks, probably after they play another away game after that loss against North Melbourne. I think that we'll leave them for a little bit. I think that they play West Coast in a few weeks over in the WA, so we'll see if they've won away from home by then. But I will just share a few thoughts I've had on them quickly before I close out. Whether this year, whether is Damien Hardwick the reason that they've been a bit more competitive, especially at home, or is it just the natural progression of the team? I think that Stewie Dew had them in about the same position last year, maybe a little bit worse off, but it's just something to think about. Unfortunately for them as well, Tuke Miller's just gone down, and he's again missing time in an important stretch for them, which really sucks. I think that Noah Anderson and Matt Rao will probably have to step up in the meantime, and that this could mean that Sam Flanders moves back into the midfield off half back for the next few weeks, and I guess let's just sort of see where Gold Coast can go, and let's see if they can win away from home and at least hold home court for the next few weeks. I will credit them by sort of saying how well they have played at home this year. There's no other team that's unbeaten at home this year. Even Sydney have lost twice at home. So I think just to break even away would be absolutely huge for them. So it's clearly like a mental battle for them right now, and they're doing a lot right to be unbeaten at home. They just need to tidy up. Even if they were winning, a third of their games away, they'd be in a pretty good position right now. So they just need to tidy that up, and when they start winning away, which eventually will happen, people are going to start to take them very seriously. To close out, I want to start a new segment called the Silent Star Society. That's what we're going to go with. Basically, I'm just going to go through a guy each week whose game and play I think is deserving to be discussed, and I think that they're potentially underrated or not spoken about as much. And keeping with the Gold Coast Suns theme, I'm going to name Bodie Hewland as this week's inductee to the Silent Star Society. A bit of a mouthful, but for me, he's sort of come out of nowhere. Like in this year specifically, I think he's a big, strong half-backer. For those that haven't watched many Gold Coast games, he's currently winning 75% of the one-on-ones he's in, and he's going at 82.9% disposal efficiency. So two nice little stats for a half-backer. I think that, and I used the same formula applied to Dusty before to find some guys that he's playing like, and the names are pretty interesting and paint a pretty good picture for Bodie Hewland. These are some of the guys that have are winning 75% of their defensive one-on-ones and are going at least going around 83% by foot disposals, not just by foot. So these guys are Lockie Ash, Darcy Moore, Carl Amon, Jack Henry, Josh Battle, Dan Houston, and Alex Pearce. And then Bodie Hewland is the other one. So pretty good company there. I think that he's one to watch for any fans that are watching Gold Coast games and don't know anyone other than Matt Rowell and Noah Anderson. So I think that if anyone's keen to see some more Gold Coast, keep an eye on him. He's a proper gun, and I think with the company that he's currently in those two statistics, love him a lot, and he's this week's Silent Star. So have a good one, everyone, and thanks for tuning in again.